Support for Designed By comes from generous donations from listeners like you. Visit aidesigncorps.org/donate.
I had different things that I was striving for, and I think a lot came out of it. And I think there's a difference between designing one's life with intention versus trying to plan one's life to the T and control everything. There's a certain amount of intention and surrender that live next to each other. So it's interesting in my coaching practice talking about how do you become intentional by stepping into the future and imagining what is your life like in a year? What is your life like in 5 years, in 10 years? And seeing it at the altitude where you can imagine it, but not so detailed that you're attached to exactly how it has to be.
Scanning all frequencies. Hello.
Chloe Gotlieb's journey is a beacon for those at the intersection of design and visionary leadership, perfectly embodying the spirit of a life well-designed. Her story, from humble beginnings to pioneering change, showcases the essence of design as the ultimate act of leadership, making intentional choices to shape our world. Her achievements reflect our belief that design is a powerful tool for visionary change, whether in business, government, or our personal lives. Chloe's dedication to empowering others and paving the way for the future generation exemplifies our mantra that design is about crafting the future with purpose, not leaving life to chance. As we celebrate Chloe's contributions to the world and leadership, we are reminded of the transformational power of intentional choices. Chloe, we've known each other for a few years now, and the more that I learn about you, the more that you've inspired my pathway to visionary change, prompting the question, where does your story begin?
One fun story is that I have deep roots in New York City. My great-grandfather was Joel Russ, who started Russ and Daughters in 1904 on the Lower East Side, and my cousins Nikki and Josh are running the store today. And so in terms of old New York, deep New York City roots, but that's not where I grew up. My mother and father met in a yoga community in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And so I was in a really free, kind of had a very free, creative childhood where I didn't enter public school until second or third grade. And I don't really remember how I learned to read, but I did. I kind of just learned to read by playing with friends and spent most of my time outside, just playing, being in nature, hanging out with my cousins who are like my brothers and sisters, and being exposed to a lot of meditation and yoga. From my earliest memories are being a kid and sitting and listening to meditation, to chanting, seeing my parents do yoga. And so it's funny looking back, when I was a kid, it was embarrassing. Once I went into public school, that was a part of my life that I did not want anyone in public school to know about. But later, around college age, it became very cool to do yoga and to meditate. And I have to say, I kind of veered away from those tools. But once I entered my professional, the high pressure corporate environments that I was a leader in, I was practicing a lot of those early techniques that I had been exposed to as a child. And I do believe that they gave me the power to sustain performance over many years, over, 25 years in corporate. So that's
do we need them?
yeah.
I think that people never really understand what being in corporate means, be it whether you are in an ad agency and a publicly traded company. I always find it's always fun, the publicly traded part versus the private. There is a little bit different of a culture, but the stress levels are there. So I would imagine it does explain that every time that I've met you, I always get to a very zen place of calm and thoughtfulness. And I am assuming that that's always been infused to most of your work.
Many people I work with would say that the more chaotic and more pressure things get at work, the calmer Chloe gets. So yes, you're definitely picking up on something there.
If we just pick up on that vibe just for a second, because that comes out of, I've actually always believed that we as Generation X, were the last feral generation. And you were really out here in the Hudson Valley. The thing that we share in common is our love for the Hudson Valley. You grew up out here. I'm new to the area. And
Joanna, I literally grew up 20 minutes from you. But it wasn't cool. You're making it cool now.
Well, the Hudson Valley, here's what I say. You probably didn't think it was cool, but
Yeah.
it's still cool. And it is there is something to finding the beauty of, we get to have this dual world where you get the fast pace of the city and you're only a train ride away to the beautiful nature that is here in this valley. But there is something that is so incredibly zen, so much so that other corporations have done that. In my years at IBM, it was the reason why Thomas J. Watson actually put IBM's research facilities in the Hudson Valley, because it was this zen place where learning and creation and invention and forward thinking could come. And so, and it was, most people don't know this about Newburgh, and the place you live, right? If it's only 20 minutes away, actually, this place was the place of the invention of electricity.
Oh, wow.
And so, there's so many like little bubbles of that when you return to nature, right? Outside of the hubbub of and the kinetic energy of New York City, there are these phenomenal communities where mindfulness is baked into the essence of the nature here. And that's, I think, kind of our conversation when we were exploring Storm King together was a lovely find.
Yeah, we took a beautiful walk at Storm King Art Center as part of the 3% retreat. And I do agree with you. I happen to have this combination of love and passion for the city and all the creativity and energy that the city brings. At the same time, I need the balance. I crave nature. I crave quiet and trees. And so any chance I get, that's where I go to really to not just to be calm and zen, but I do believe that those pauses lead to more creativity. One of the things I loved what you said about design being intentional choices is that sometimes those choices are counterintuitive. We're trained or wired to think that to be successful in corporate environments, whether it was RGA, where I led creative teams for many years, or at Google, where I led design teams, we're wired to think the more meetings, the faster we run, the busier we are, the better it is, the more successful. And I want to challenge that, because I do think that we forget to pause, we forget to recharge. And these careers are marathons, they're not sprints. And so we really do have to find ways to recharge and to get quiet spaces to tap into our creativity again. And so nature is one of them. But even short mindfulness breaks in the morning or throughout the day can be just as powerful when you're in a city.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's go back into, okay, you go to high school, you've come from a storied, let's just start with one of my favorite places is Russ and Daughters. So we also have that in common. It's just like, oh, you know what? It is actually one of New York's like just biggest gems. Everybody always talks about Katz's, and what they really don't understand is the difference between a delicatessen, right? and what Russ and Daughters is. And that for those of us who are pescatarians, go to Russ and Daughters. Like, it is such a freaking find. And you just, the warmth of what your grandparents did. And there's, by the way, this phenomenal documentary about them that was done several years ago that before you and I got to know each other, I had just taken a deep dive into. It was like, oh my God, that's such like New York Jewish culture and how they are so woven into the fabric. So you get to, you come out to high school, you're out in the Hudson Valley. Tell me a little bit about that existence. And then how did you see design potentially, or even creativity as a path for yourself?
Well, first of all, I hadn't considered that designing bagels might have been my first exposure to design, but I do have very fond memories of visiting my grandma Ann, who was the youngest of the three daughters, in her apartment on 19th Street and 3rd Avenue. We would drive over the George Washington Bridge from the Hudson Valley. It was very exciting as soon as we got close to New York City, and go down to visit my grandma or the store. And there would always be a brunch with a huge spread. And the kids would get to pick, did we want, chive cream cheese and lox, or put sable, or add pickled herring, and it got very creative. So that might have been my first exposure to designing. But no, in all seriousness, looking back, there was always a designer within me. I just wasn't exposed or never had access to design thinking or design as a career option until after college. So when I actually look back, one of my earliest memories in elementary school, I joined the Olympics of the Mind team. And I have these amazing memories of being given a design brief. That's not what it was called at the time, but it was, you would get like a piece of string and a stick and a pencil, and you would have to save the princess. You would have to get to the castle and fight the alligators. And you had all these constraints, and you would have to architect her path and act it out. And our team did amazing. I remember going to Buffalo, New York, for the state champions of Olympics of the Mind. So even from a very early age, there was leadership and design in my genes, in my DNA. And it's interesting because they say that kids go counter to their parents sometimes. So my parents were not at all career people. I was the first person in my family to, even finish college. And they had jobs. My dad was a carpenter, and my mom ended up later doing sales and real estate. But when I was a kid, it was a pre-professional, professional life was not even top of mind at all. An inner spiritual life and well-being was what we talked about at home and what I saw as the most important. So it wasn't from my family. It was from something within me that was very driven from a young age. And even in high school, I kind of got bored with the small town I was in, and somehow found out about a scholarship and went to France my junior year. So I spent my whole junior year of high school living in France and traveling, and then, came back and started college. And at that time, because we had no money, my parents didn't have a lot of money. It was just, go to a state school. That's what all of the kids I knew we did.
Yeah.
So it's funny now going through a college process with my older daughter that there's so many options. I don't even remember anyone talking to me. They just handed me a SUNY application. And so I went to the State University of Buffalo, where I had a great education.
Actually, phenomenal. I'm
Yeah.
a huge proponent.
Yeah.
As a mom of four, I have my youngest is a SUNY purchase grad, and she's now getting her master's. But what I would tell you is like the SUNY system is such an amazing system. So here, I'm a huge advocate of in a world where our kids do have so many more choices than we did.
Yes.
As Gen Xers, where it was I always looked at some of my friends went to art school. Some of them went into maybe more technical fields. And then there were kids that went to college. And it was the kids that went to, I always was I don't want to go to a state school. I want to go to one of those artsy schools. Because it was actually more of the way that I knew that I could be successful. How are you successful? Because even one of the things I kind of picked up on was hey, I kind of learned to read in the wild, and it wasn't as formal. Do you think that there was, I think, more of an emphasis on just kind of getting in, and then that the education system wasn't so, oh gosh, I'm looking for the right word, but it's almost so methodical? Because it feels today the difference between when my kids went through it, there was a methodology, and then everybody was striving to get into Ivy League schools or name. Let me start with not just Ivy League schools, name brand schools.
I'm an example of the girl who did not go to the name brand school, and I'm very proud of what I achieved professionally and hopefully have more chapters to come.
Indeed, you will. You
I
always
think the
will.
thing I just read all the time. You couldn't, if you ask my parents, as soon as I learned to read, that was it. I fell in love with books and I lived in books. My books are my favorite, possession object that I have. I have bookshelves full of books. I'm constantly having to give away books because I read so much. I was always curious. And I would say there is a methodical path that seems like insurance towards a certain pathway. But I also have seen that grit and resilience and curiosity are just as powerful. And getting into the best schools doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. So yeah, I think my path was definitely not the traditional one, but it was more that I just followed my curiosity. And the interesting thing is that because I had lived and studied abroad in France and then in Spain my last year of college, I was curious about the world and I just wanted to work for the UN. I thought I would be a diplomat. I studied political science and I ended up getting a job being the international student advisor at the Parsons School of Design after college. And that's where I discovered design.
Wow.
It wasn't until, and I think it's interesting, I tell my kids some of the careers that you'll love or chapters you'll love don't even exist today.
That's right.
So this girl growing up in the Hudson Valley never knew that design was an option until after college was over. It was when I got, my first job as an international student advisor was at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. And from there, I went on to Parsons. And it was at Parsons that I absolutely pivoted, fell in love, started taking classes, ended up getting a master's degree in media studies at the New School. Bob Greenberg came to the New School to give a talk. And that was the spark that ignited whatever came next, which was I will do anything to go work at RGA. As soon as I heard Bob talk about the future of media and the disruptions and all of his amazing vision, I just knew that that was the only place I wanted to work. So I finished my graduate degree and went on from there to start my career in design. And it's just so interesting to think, I think about AI, for example, we're in the early stages of AI and you, Joanna, are such an expert in this space, but it's moving so fast. Every week it's getting, every week it changes. So by the time my daughters, who are now 11 and 16, are done with college, I can't even imagine what the options might be for them.
The interesting part is, I think one of the things that AI, to your point, even in our careers, and you've said something I think is so profound, which is, when I was in school, the career of product designer of things on the internet didn't exist.
Yeah.
And you and I are the same age. So
we don't have to tell. We can be proud of it, or we can not. But either way, everyone will get an idea. We're
Gen Xers, people.
Exactly.
So just go look up how old Gen Xers are. And I've been out there with it this year. But what I would tell you is that, what's interesting is that we have seen that, to your point around meeting, because Bob was an oracle and is an oracle.
Oh, yeah.
Start there, particularly in the area of media. One of the things that I really appreciate about people like him, the likes of a David Sable, who was at WPP for many years, these guys, they did, I think, a remarkable job of actually carving a way and a business pathway to be creative in those spaces in a way that was almost industrialized. And that is a feat unto itself. But one of the things that I think that you touched on that I thought was super, super important, and I don't want to gloss over it, is that there are career paths that are opening up.
Yeah.
And today that weren't there yesterday. And as we look at tomorrow, meaning tomorrow, literally the day after tomorrow, there will be new career paths that our own children, as they enter the global workforce, will need to do. I think one of the things that I tap into, though, is that the story of design and the story of you as a designer and a creator, at least from afar, as you know, as an observer, is one that has been thoughtful and intentional. Those are those like true threads that seem to continue through your story.
Thoughtful and intentional and serendipitous at the same time, because life is always, we can try to design it and then it does also what it needs to do, and we have to meet whatever happens. This theme though of designing one's life is it was always there even before, I went on to get certified as a coach, where you really do study to do that. It was always there. And I think that obviously making money was a consideration, but it was never the key driver. The title and money were never the key driver. I followed the curiosity. I followed the passion. I had different things that I was striving for, and I think a lot came out of it. And I think there's a difference between designing one's life with intention versus trying to plan one's life to the T and control everything. There's a certain amount of intention and surrender that live next to each other. So it's interesting in my coaching practice talking about how do you become intentional by stepping into the future and imagining what is your life like in a year? What is your life like in 5 years, in 10 years? And seeing it at the altitude where you can imagine it, but not so detailed that you're attached to exactly how it has to be, right? So for example, I could imagine, that I am sharing, or I could see for you that you might have imagined, like, I'm going to share my ideas about design with the world, but maybe podcasts weren't even a thing when you started to imagine that. And at first you used to do really great public speaking, and then this podcasting came along. So the right altitude is more, I have stories to share, and then the details is what we kind of surrender to. And what I'm talking about starts to get into this idea of designing human potential and life design, which I'm very excited about now. And it's not a new idea. Companies like Amazon, which you know well, have a practice of, okay, we have a product idea. Let's step into as if it launched. Let's write the headline. Let's imagine how it would impact our audience. What are all the worst things that could happen along the way?
The PR FAQ is one of the things I loved about joining it. And I'll just kind of share with listeners, if you have never done this, whether it's in your life thing, it's actually one of the most powerful, intentional things you could do is actually write to your future self. And Jeff Bezos is a huge fan of the 6-page memo. So a part of that memo is it's a 2-page press release. And think of it as a future state design brief. It says, I'm going to launch something on this, and this is how it's going to impact customers' lives. And you got to do it in of what both your intention, its purpose, and the impact that's going to have on the people around you. And then you have to go through and answer what is, I think, so important, which are FAQs. What are the questions you have today? And as you go through this process of realizing whatever that vision is, what are the questions that pop up along the way that you still need to answer? And it really anchors you in a place of going, here's what I know today. Here's what I don't know. But a part of this journey is learning, right? To realize that vision, I don't know how the heck I'm going to get there, but it's a North Star. And so to your point around that and the coaching that you're doing, I was really inspired by your quantum leaps, because I felt so, it's like when you practice it every day in my Amazonian life, the same methodology of thinking, what is the quantum leap forward of what I want to do? And then it's taking responsibility, not just for the intention, but following it up with action.
Yes, I love all of what you said. I love that you mentioned writing to your future self. you're in your question, have you always designed your life with intention? If there's people in your audience thinking, well, how do you do that? That sounds interesting, but I don't know how to do that. Writing to your future self is probably the simplest way to access what we're describing. And it can be a year from now, or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 6 months from now, any date in the future. But that future state design brief works for products at Amazon. It also works for humans.
That's right.
And so this is where I get into the life design or designing human potential. What if we could apply the same design tools that we use for our companies to build brands, to build products, and actually take them and apply them to our lives? What could happen? And so the quantum leap that Joanna's talking about was at the 3% retreat at Joanna's headquarters in the Hudson Valley, secret headquarters. We won't give out the address, but such a beautiful place to be creative and retreat. And we gathered there, and the workshop that I did was just inviting people. Okay, so let's pick a date. Let's step into the future and then work backwards, because normally we're working from the present forwards. That's how we, run our lives. And even back to how do you plan your life? We just think about, well, I need this degree, and then I need to work at this company and get this title and da, da, da. What if you actually stepped into the future and said, what do I want this to feel like? Who am I working with? What are the senses around it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What am I doing? What lights me up? What gives me energy? And actually really start every day to imagine that future. And then, as you said, not just imagine it, but then come back to the present and say, okay, what are the actions I need to take? You're then bringing together the power of the future backward thinking plus the actions that you're taking from today forward. And I've seen with my clients, it's very powerful to combine those things.
How have you applied that in your career path and in your journey, given your, the very Zen place of, because I've always felt like you're very much, one part futurist, one part craftsperson, right? You have the ability to have the vision, but then the implementation is always so beautiful. Picture a place where design and visionary leadership converge, influencing everything from government to the vast reaches of space. Welcome to Design By, with me, Joanna Peña-Bickley, for chats with leaders who use the power of design to forge better futures. Don't leave life to chance. Open up your podcast app, search for Designed By with Joanna Peña-Bickley, then crush that follow button to build a better future for everyone, everywhere, every single day.
It's funny. I've always worked at the edge of what technology, what was capable, what we were capable of. And that was where I got inspired, but that was really stressful because when you work at the edge of things, there's a lot of people that say this can't be done. The feasibility isn't there yet. One example of that might be recently at Google, the team and I got really excited about not just AI, but generative visual AI in the shopping space. So in the Google shopping space, what would be possible if we started to really reimagine what shopping could be, leveraging the power of generative visual AI? And that was kind of I know now it seems normal, and there's been a lot of launches that are doing that. Yeah. But when we started talking about it, it was very much at the edge of things and seemed like a big stretch. And so that became a lab, that became the beginning of ideas that ended up leading to some really amazing launches that the team has announced. I'm not talking about anything, secret right now. But back to your question, I think that this goes back to something, and I don't know, maybe Joanna, you can help me articulate this, but where other people saw barriers, I didn't see them.
Right.
And maybe that is because of my non-traditional upbringing, but where other people would see a no, I would just see a why not?
Why not?
Yeah. Why not? Like,
yeah.
And
I've always looked at it as it's actually, I've approached it, and this is, I both share the role of design and engineer. I always knew that, when you work in technology, to be a good designer, I needed to, it's twofold. I said, to be a good designer, I needed to be a great designer. And I had a wonderful mentor in my own mother to show me what that was. But I also needed to be an engineer. I needed to have the skill sets of the engineer to actually manipulate, like to understand what that was, because otherwise I was relying on someone else's idea of feasibility. The second part is it was for me about actually asking the question a little bit differently, which is what if? What
Yeah,
if,
I
right?
love that.
Because what if says, what if we did this for people, right? And then we talk about how we make it possible. And to me, the what if says, what if we could solve this problem, right? It isn't broad enough to say, hey, it's this technology, it's this, but, what if I could solve people's data problem in a way that reduces their cognitive load and their stress levels, right? That's what AI is supposed to do. We have oodles and oodles and oodles of data. What it's really doing, and what it continues to do is it sifts through everything from pattern recognition to actually come up with whether it be an insight, an aha, or in generative, right? The creation of something new. And, I've always believed it is as a cognitive tool. It's formulated by the same way that our own cognition is. So to that point of, when you think about those moonshots, it's the hope. I think that when I ask what if, it demonstrates a hope for a better future, and people can get behind that. They'll hack their way to the way that it might need to be, right? If you bring them there too. And so to that end, right, is the things that everybody will say, it's not technically feasible today. But what if it was, right? And when we ask what if it was, then you start to explore through research what would make it feasible.
I love the what if. And it reminds me as well, in the early days of working with Google Docs, there was work already in AI. There was Smart Compose in Gmail at the time. There was innovation there. The teams had been working on different things quietly. And we started to, and mind you, this was 5 years ago, we started to think about things like summarization. What if you could go into a whole doc and summarize it? What if you could help people write better for productivity in the workplace? But these were crazy ideas in 2018. And now these features have launched, and I look at it and it's so amazing to see, as like you said, there were enough people saying what if, but the timing wasn't right. Sometimes it takes a market force or disruption to actually light the fire, to rally the army, to like really go for it.
Yeah. And that's an area that, for what it's worth for our audience, is that I always found that the importance of being able to build a business case for the what if is your best friend, because we are dreamers. You're a dreamer. I see you as just this, and dreamers are important in our ecosystem, because that's the part of vision. If you never dream, you never envision anything. And one of the things I think that we as dreamers, and that you do so eloquently, is inspire people to think a little bit differently. And I think that's so much a part of the journey as creators, as designers. Is anytime I'm one of those people that, if anybody out there, and those of you who've worked with me know that I don't take no is not an answer that I usually I enjoy taking. I'm slightly petulant about it.
It's not easy to work with us always, right? Because sometimes, the resources aren't there yet, or people are really nervous about going into that stretch zone or going into that edge, and not everyone is comfortable there. And that's great. Every team has to have a combination of the kind of disruptors and the people that are more practical for things to work well. I do have a very pragmatic side. And so I would say that I have a lot of what if, but I also get excited about improving core product and, making sure that the viability, the business case for the ideas are there. It's interesting. One of the things in my consulting practice right now, I'm actually doing a workshop next Wednesday for a team on business acumen for designers. And so
That's such an important skill.
Yeah. So I loved what you said about building the business case for the what if, because the business case for the core product has often been established. People know why you're building, the core product has been established. It might have been a what if at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But when resources, because it all comes down to constraints, right? So when resources, engineering specifically, are dedicated to improving the core product, it's not easy to peel engineers off to build the what if. And so that's something that does take a business case. And I would add to that. So one of the things I'm talking to the designers about is, how do you understand the business model? How do you align your design with the business goals? How do you assess competitive landscape? How do you communicate design impact? That's great. And what the designers have is the superpower of design fiction.
Yeah.
What the designers have is then the ability to take their tools and sketch the future. Yeah. And I heard this time and again from the engineers at Google. We love when the designers make these ideas more concrete, because for them, sometimes it was hard to imagine, well, what would summarization, why would that matter for somebody in the workplace? Yeah. Why would summarization in docs, how would that work? And the designers can actually go and imagine it and then come back to the engineers and say, look at the what if, like play with it. Here's a prototype. Look what this feels like. And then it becomes much more concrete. And so what I'm working with this design team on is, how do you marry the business acumen and kind of the business model and your superpowers of design tools? Because then you're unstoppable if you understand the business language and the design tools.
Well, and that's one of those things that I think that I wish that they taught more in design schools, right? In design programs. And it has always come, look, I actually felt like I came into the space because I, became a designer in my early years as an entrepreneur. So I didn't have a choice of the business part, because I had to run a business and and do the work. And the interesting part about this is that I have seen some of the best design leadership, not just be business acumen, but be able to answer really simple questions to say, will this feature increase usage of this product by X percent, right? Even if it's a wild guess, being able to collect that data, weave it into your design narrative, right, is so powerful, because now you have told the business how it can increase its revenue or increase its usership, because most great digital products today are a usership model. In our Alexa days, it used to be, how much incremental active usages a day can I increase Alexa's, the time that you call on her for something. And that was a key metric for success. So one of the first things, when you're saying, what if, the next question you have to say, and if we do this, this is what success looks like, right? Because in the big what ifs, you should be able to go in and say, our total addressable market size is this. And I'll give you an example of this that I think is an important one, which is, I was working in the area of accessibility. As you're probably aware, I'm very out there with this. I'm dyslexic. And I went and said, okay, what is 20% of the global population's total addressable market size if we actually implement this particular feature that would address this problem that dyslexics have in reading? And to be able to go forward, write the document and the design presentation and answer the question. The first question in the FAQ was that it's actually a $7.1 billion revenue opportunity. Right? If we come to the table and say that inclusive design isn't just hey, we're checking this box because we're a good company, but actually you can make money because people with disabilities also are customers.
Yeah, now you're talking business language.
That's right.
So there's two forces that are so interesting. Companies speaking design more and more. And it's no, secret that the iMac launch in 1998 is said to have saved Apple's business at the time, right?
Mhm.
Because Steve Jobs saw the power of design, and what computers look like before the iMac and after is radically different.
Yeah.
So we've seen examples of how design shapes business. But people are still learning the language of design in business. But the other force is, how do you arm the designers with the language of business?
That's right.
And the way you're describing it, how can a leader say no to your idea?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're painting a picture of growth for the business,
That's right.
the value. And what really inspired me as I've been developing this presentation is actually a talk. I recommend everyone go check it out. Steve Johnson, who's a VP of UX at Netflix, did a keynote at Config in 2023. You can find it on YouTube, called "Design Without Business is Just Decoration."
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. He talks about the Apple case study. He talks about the questions that we should be asking ourselves when we are designing. That it's, we're designing for, yes, we're obsessed with our customers, our users. Of course, as designers, our number one priority is our, users and our customers. And at the same time, we have to design for business opportunities.
Oh, absolutely. Most businesses are not non-for-profits.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to demonstrate this. And somebody asked me recently, and it was just actually a young said, tell me how, design was impacted the business at Amazon. And I said, have you ever been to Amazon.com? And they were like, yeah. And I said, you know what? There's actually a famous design story behind the buy button, and how moving it to the left or the right increased transactions by not just percentages, but by millions, right? Millions of dollars. So the power of design and understanding your customer's intent and demonstrating that those two things, right? He's absolutely right. I said it very similarly, but I always say it's actually that design without constraint, right, is art. Yeah. And the constraint, there's technical constraints and there are business constraints. And what makes great design, at least product design, in my opinion, is when you can use those constraints not as handcuffs. It drives me nuts when I hear designers say, I said, well, you need to go back to the drawing board and say, what if again? Because our job, right, is to imagine the future where those constraints exist and we use them to create something net new and innovate.
Yeah, I love, what is that quote? Freedom within constraints.
Yeah.
Design within constraints is my favorite, but not just my favorite. It usually yields the best, most powerful design.
Yeah. What have you have had just the storied career. You went from, meeting Bob at in grad school to becoming RGA's chief creative officer. Tell me a little bit about that journey. When you were in grad school, did you go, hey, someday I'm going to be the chief creative officer? Or was this something that just as opportunity opened it? How did you walk through that door?
I look back at my years at RGA with so much gratitude because, and this happens to many people, it's just the right place at the right time. It wasn't just, when I say place, I literally mean 350 West 39th Street, where RGA was. Like Bob's vision for the company was born in that building. That building was the only example of Bauhaus architecture in Manhattan, or one of the only. And that idea of Bauhaus, of multidisciplinary art and design coming together, was actually seeped in the way we worked. And, did I work hard? Absolutely. I remember when we won the Nike account in the year like 2001 or 2, and then started building out Nike's digital ecosystem with them. There were nights where I slept on a yoga mat from Nike Women under my desk. Like I would, 60, 80-hour weeks. I worked so hard.
Wait a minute. Did it bring back those childhood memories?
I met my husband there. I made some of my best friends there that are still my best friends. I remember the buzz of what it was like to come to that building and the excitement that we were working at the frontier of design, the cutting edge of creativity. And Bob had a lot to do with that. That he was, he, like you, he's dyslexic, and he talks about his ability to have pattern recognition. His neurodiversity was actually his superpower. And I have memories of that building, of Bob coming to us and saying, we're going to put in video conferencing, and video conferencing is going to connect all of our global offices and change the way people work. And we would just look at him like, what are you talking about? Video. And the technology at the time was so old.
Yeah.
But he saw it. He saw the Zooms and the Google Meets before anyone, maybe 15 years before anyone. So what I'm saying is, it wasn't just what we were making and the amazing brands we worked with, but the way we worked was such a fun, it was just such a fun experience. I have to, I also remember being, as I grew in my career there, a few things stand out. One is that I was asked to lead almost right away. And I laugh. They made me a manager, Joanna. I swear I had maybe been there, like 2 years. And they were like, oh, you have some level of emotional intelligence. You go, like, we had this small UX team. And so they probably saw something in me maybe that I didn't see yet. But, today that wouldn't happen. Like at Google, you wouldn't give a mid-level or senior designer a team to manage. You would wait, right? But no, that in that agency world, things were moving so fast. And so, yes, we were given these opportunities. I got to lead very early in my career. So if you say my design career is 23 years long, I would say I've been leading for 20 years of it. The other thing that stands out is I was always about the team. Like if you ask me, what am I proud of? I think about all the amazing things that the designers I've worked with have gone on to do in their careers, leading design at all these companies and creating amazing products and having, impact on billions of people. I was always really invested in the team's success. And it's funny, many of the people that worked for me would say she was always a natural coach. So it was no mystery that later I would want to get certified and actually do more coaching.
And that is so much of design leadership, right?
Yeah.
It is, I always looked at design leadership as, yes, still being able to help solve the most complex problems, right? The higher you get in leadership, I always said it was the more complex the problems became. But saving the time also for mentoring your team in the manner in which they solve those problems. Agency life in the 90s and 2000s was something else.
I mean, the talent, Joanna, when I think of the design talent, the people we got to work with and the craft, like, I just don't know the concentration of design craft at the level of excellence was unlike anything I've ever seen. And so amazing. And I think working with Nike so closely did propel us forward in many ways, because Nike was so focused on craft. And so that partnership between RJ and Nike over 15 plus years definitely helped keep our craft very strong. I have also really hard memories. I was the first executive female to have a baby. And so my boss, the head of, design, left as I was pregnant. And it was a funny moment because I was asked, are you going to put your hat in the ring for this role? And I just was like, but I'm pregnant. I didn't know what it would be like to work. I didn't know what that would be like to come back to work or lead a team. And I did end up putting my hat in the ring. And, my boss at the time, Chris Colburn, was lovely to cover me on maternity leave. And then I came back and led the design team. But I remember coming back and pumping in a little office with cardboard on the window as people would walk back and forth, because there was no pump room. And I also think that I had not mentors, but sponsors. And, I like to talk about the difference between what's a coach, what's a mentor, what's a sponsor.
Yeah.
I had men and I'll share two specifically at RGA that pushed me when I didn't believe in myself.
Mm.
They saw my potential and put me into positions and opportunities that I would have said no to because of my own fear and sense of limitations. And so Chris Colborn was the one who hired me as an interaction designer out of grad school. He saw my potential. And Nick Law was also there throughout my career at RGA, putting me into these positions of leadership and reminding me, you can do this. And I remember with my second daughter, I was pregnant, and Nick said, I want you and Terrace to be the ECDs, ECDs of New York, the executive creative directors. And I said, no, I'm sorry, Nick, I can't. I'm about to have a baby, not good timing. And I remember talking to one of my best friends who's still on my personal board of advisors. And she said to me, Chloe, are you saying no because you don't want to do it or because you're scared?
Mm.
And when I peeled away the layers, I said, I'm not scared. I'm terrified. I said, I don't really think I can do this. I'm not ready. And that was a very different conversation. But he believed I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why these sponsors, even sometimes more than a mentor, are so critical to lift other people up, right? When they don't know that they can do something yet.
Yeah. I love that you talked about that, because there is a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And I don't think that we talk enough about the importance. Mentorship programs are great and they're wonderful for advice. But I think that we still live in a pretty biased world where we have spent our whole lives as women, generations of women, telling ourselves we weren't enough. And because we never saw what that leadership could be, we couldn't see ourselves in it. And I love that you have two examples of people who sponsored your success, were willing to put their, to me, a sponsor is willing to put their badge on the table, right? They're not going to leave that meeting without the outcome that is good for your success, be it in a promotion, you getting the job, or a raise.
Yeah. Or a new role, a new opportunity, promote. Yeah, exactly. And then things kind of switched within me. At a certain point, I believed in myself more. And I do remember, and mind you, this is over, 15 plus years. I took a break and went to Razorfish for a few awesome years and came back to RGA. I loved working at RGA. I couldn't stay away. But there was a point where the flip switched, and I really did believe in myself enough to push for the chief creative officer role. And that was one. It was funny, in advertising around that time, there was a really successful ad campaign called Fearless. It was the Fearless Girl statue. Do you remember? It's still
it's still there.
It's still there in Wall Street. And I would go, I kind of had that statue in my mind, that there was a point where I knew my worth from a financial perspective, from how I could lead, the kind of work I could generate for our clients, how I had helped build the company with other, with my partners. And I did go for it. I did go for that role. So that was also very empowering. And then it was interesting. And again, it's funny thinking about the history of my career, because it kind of parallels the history of product design. That when I started working on design at RGA, we were doing the transformation for companies. They didn't have engineers and designers in-house working on products. There was no Google yet.
That's
there
right.
was no Facebook yet. Nike hired RGA to help build out their first commerce platform and to work on Nike Plus with Apple and all these things. And over time, those digital products became so critical to those companies that they stopped outsourcing it as much. So they had all started building their own in-house teams. And so when I decided to leave advertising and go over to tech, what I was looking for at that time was not necessarily title. I mean, I went down in title. I went down from chief creative officer to director. It wasn't, I didn't care about the title. The thing that I wanted was to have impact on as many people and be as helpful as I could as a designer to as many people as possible. And so what got me really excited was Google's mission to organize the world's information and make it accessible, and to actually be in teams where the features that we launched, you could see it impacting 500 million people the next, day.
Yeah.
So I think it's just so funny when I look back at how those shifts took place, and all the companies now that have these huge design and engineering teams in-house.
Wow, I just love how she correlated her making a bagel into her putting together her first design. I thought that was a magnificent connection.
I do too. I think one of the things that I also loved is that she's an avid reader. And I think that's so important that we exercise that muscle between our ears, that we are constantly curious enough to read other people's works and to be curious about other people's stories. And I loved that she does that and still finds great joy in that. It really brings me to a couple of things that I think she talked about, which is that coaching, right, is important at every age and every stage. It's not just at the beginning of your career, right, like where you're at. It's also at your mid and in your later career. And the importance about us actually needing to create mechanisms for the affordability of that kind of coaching. What did you think of that?
Well, I very much appreciate that it needs to be more accessible. I think, for someone who's at my stage of my career, having someone early on feels invaluable. And I'm sure later on when you're farther in your career, it's also great. It just, a lot of times it can sometimes fall under a paywall. And especially when you're starting out, that paywall is a struggle to get to and get through.
Well, and I think that's why we as employers and we as managers, and I think this is an important distinction, right, is that coaching is different from managing, right? Coaching is this objective outsider who, frankly, I actually do a lot of coaching still with a lot of my former colleagues at Amazon, and now that I'm outside of Amazon. And I think one of the important things in those coaching sessions is that I come to it with maybe a fresh set of eyes. And so I think that you're right. I think that a paywall is really tough, and that's where we need to come to our employers and really negotiate in the early days about the importance of that kind of career growth and having them help supplement it in non-traditional ways. Because I always think that they think, your career growth is something that just happens inside of a corporation or at a university. And I think there's mentors and sponsors along the way that help to develop you. Because as she said, right, your career is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
I mean, we were very fortunate to have her at our recent Future Frequencies retreat. And I love hearing from her and everything she's providing in the coaching, because she did offer coaching to our lovely esteemed guests, and that she always wants to connect with others and see where they're coming from.
I loved that. And I got to tell you, one of my favorite things that we did was actually her quantum leaps exercise, right? The quantum leaps exercise, for those of you who get to come to a Future Frequencies salon, is really important because it helps you envision a future, right? And write about it in a way that actually helps you realize that that future is possible. Because the minute that you start, you put that flag in the sand, now you have to work backwards, kind of like in the Amazon fashion of working backwards from the customer. You're working backwards from an intended future. And that I really, really love doing with her. I want us to think a little bit about something that, in speaking with her and going through her journey, that brought something to mind for me, in which it's this quote by Thomas Hobbes that reminds us that curiosity is a lust of the mind. And with that, I really believe that kind of captures the essence of Chloe.
On that note, let's read us out.
This episode was written and produced by the AI Design Corps at Aurora 21 in the heart of New York's magical Hudson Valley. Special thanks to the musical talents of Rachel Bickley, our podcast sound designer. Our theme music was composed by Substance Studios. If you're already following the show, you're well on your way to designing a better future. If not, what are you waiting for? It's time to join the magic. Go to your favorite podcast service and search Designed By with Joanna Peña-Bickley and hit follow.
Design the future.